I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
So, Jay, how many podcasts do you think we did this year? About 150?
Oh, more than 150. Imagine if we had do 3 a week. How many weeks?
Well, that's 150.
Yeah, about 150, yeah.
So, but with each one of those, I had to read books. And I was just saying to Amy, who was our guest on this podcast, you have to read more than 150 books. You have to read more than one book by the guest, usually on average. And I read books, a lot of books by people who I think might be guests or I might want to have as guests and decide if I want to have them as guests. So I read so much for this podcast. And then after a podcast is done, I'm usually tired. I love watching TV. So I binge watch shows with Robin and watch YouTube videos and do other things, of course, play chess, watch comedy all the time. So I have all of these recommendations that I am happy to share. I didn't want to make it overwhelming, so I picked like 10 things to recommend. It's not by any means all of my recommendations, but it's 10 of them. And we invited Amy Morin on. Amy has been on the podcast quite a bit. She wrote 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do and a lot of other books in that category. And so we each share our recommendations for this coming year based on what we enjoyed this past year. So I hope you guys enjoy, and feel free to share on Twitter your recommendations and let us know, tag us. But also, if you love this episode, or even if you just mildly like this episode, heck, even if you hate this episode, please subscribe because it helps me so much and it gives me hope for the future to keep continuing and doing this podcast, knowing that people are enjoying it and subscribing to it. So let me know. And thanks again for listening to this one.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Amy, how are you doing? I haven't spoken to you probably in like at least a year.
I know. It's been a long time. I'm doing great. How are you? How's Atlanta?
Good. Atlanta's great. It's really quiet here compared to everywhere else I've ever lived.
Yeah.
But you live on a boat.
Yeah. So
it's really quiet on a boat.
It's usually pretty quiet here. Yeah.
Well, what have you been up to?
I don't remember when it was we spoke last, but I took on the role of editor-in-chief at Very Well Mind, which I said a long time ago, like I'm never going to take on a 9-to-5 job, but here I am. And we joined forces with my podcast. So I changed what used to be the Mentally Strong People podcast is now the Very Well Mind podcast. And I have a workbook coming out in February, and then I have a couples book coming out next December.
Oh, that's good. Do workbooks
Yes.
do well?
Yeah, it was one of those, so many people who've read my first book like wanted more, but yet I could only do so much coaching or so many hours of trying to help people. So we said, let's do a workbook. So I'm excited for that one to come out. And then the couples book I'm just writing now and it's supposed to come out
Couples
next year.
book's going to be huge. That'll be a huge one. 12 things mentally strong couples don't do, or what is it?
Yeah. 13 things mentally strong couples don't do. So it seemed like the next step in the series, just it seemed to make sense to write one about couples.
That's good. So what are some of the things mentally strong couples don't do?
And I think some of the bigger ones would be like that they don't use their emotions as weapons, because we talk so much about, like you should talk about your feelings. But what I'm seeing people do is be like, well, we can't talk about that relationship problem we have because it's too upsetting for me. So I don't feel safe in this conversation. But really, they just don't want to talk about it. Or when somebody has an anger problem, they're really quick to be like, well, I lose my temper, so I'm just going to walk away. But really, they just don't want to have that conversation. So I'm seeing a lot of that. Whereas we talk so much about feelings these days, people are like, I'm going to actually use my feelings, or I'm going to project my feelings in a way that makes it that I don't actually have to talk about the tough stuff, or I don't have to change my behavior. It becomes more like an excuse.
Well, who's that couple, the Gutmans? They can tell at just a glance if a couple's going to stay together or not.
Right. Supposedly they can, within so many seconds, just by looking at their conversations or the way that they deal with things or how they relate to their story of how they met, just a couple of quick key indicators, and with a certain success rate, they can say if you're going to get divorced or not.
And what do you think are some of the things they look at?
When it comes to like people sharing their story, it's like somebody says, hey, how did you and your spouse meet? And somebody says, oh, math class, or we met on the internet. It's not a very good indicator that they're going to stay together forever. But if they tell a story of like, oh, the first time I saw her, she was beautiful, and they get into details about what they like about the person, that's a sign that they're probably going to stay together.
Oh, that's good.
Strangely, right? And then another one is just in the way that they handle conflict, whether, the one person gets annoyed and the other person shuts down quickly, or if they can talk about it versus problem solving together. The couples that can tackle a problem together obviously stay together much longer than the couples who immediately call each other names and walk away.
That's good too. All right. Well, I think this podcast is basically our recommendations. I've been thinking about all the things that I've enjoyed this past year that I would recommend to people, in addition to, of course, all of your books. And so the whole thing is, Amy, I haven't spoken to you in a year. And what have you been watching, reading, doing? What have you been enjoying?
Oh, good question. So, books, lots of books. So I know Ryan Holiday. I love his latest book about discipline is destiny. That was a good one.
It's so funny because that book also was I made a list of just 10 things, but I obviously there's more, but that's number 2 on my list.
Really? I didn't know that, but obviously, I mean, it was a really good book, and I had him on my podcast too. And discipline isn't something that I would say probably you or I tend to struggle with in a lot of ways, but there are other ways in my life where I was like, okay, because I tend to look at discipline sometimes as like something I don't really want, right?
Yeah, it's like a negative. Like,
Right.
oh, you were a bad person, so now you have to be disciplined.
Right. And so I really wanted, after I read the book, I really wanted him on my podcast because I had some questions for him. I was like, yeah, but I didn't want to go to bed early. Is that bad? Like, would I be a better person if I went to sleep early? Because I find that to be one of the greatest joys in life. And the other thing we were talking about is, like dress code, because he's all about you should dress for success. And I was like, no, I moved to a boat in the Florida Keys, so I don't have to wear anything fancy. And so I was grateful that he then agreed, like, no, if it's important to you in life to stay up as late as you want, then you go ahead and do that. Or if it's important to you to walk around in flip-flops, like, that's okay. You can go ahead and do that. So I got some relief from actually bringing him on the show and talking to him. And that was something I learned from you too, because you've had a podcast a lot longer than I have, but like, that's one of the cool things about being a podcast host. You can read a book and then invite the person on your show and have a conversation with them.
You can read something and then get more clarity on it. I really like this one story that Ryan and I spoke about on my podcast had an impact on me, which is that I'm gonna exaggerate a little what was discussed. He basically said Babe Ruth was not a good baseball player, and for those listening who know baseball, Babe Ruth was like for 50 years or 40 years, he had the record of most home runs. He had like over 700 home runs. So he was considered this incredible hitter and famous as the best baseball player ever. And so I was like, how can you say that? And he said that because he spent so much time, gambling, womanizing, he didn't really have a healthy lifestyle. He didn't really have reverence for the game that he was so great at. So we don't really know how great he could have been. That it was a subtraction for the net beauty of baseball that Babe Ruth wasn't the best baseball player he could have been because he didn't have reverence for the game. He didn't have discipline for the game. And so we missed out on how good he could have been.
That was one of the things I was curious about too, because in his book, he talks about the difference between Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. And Lou Gehrig had this super disciplined life and wouldn't go out and party, and he ate really well and he took care of himself. And then Babe Ruth was the absolute opposite, but yet they were both performing really well. So that was my question. Like, well, wouldn't they say, well, at least Babe Ruth had a lot more fun along the way? To which his answer was like, no, he ate all these hot dogs. He couldn't control his appetite so much that he would end up in the ER because he would overdose on hot dogs and soda and make himself sick. So he's like, he actually wasn't having fun, but sort of our definition of fun from the outside is, yeah, but he didn't follow any of the rules. He did it as he pleased. And
yeah, I think it's like I think like his point is always, and this is like a Stoic point, is that hedonism is not necessarily fun.
right.
Like just seeking pleasure is not necessarily the path to well-being. And the discussion had an impact on me in that the things that I'm pursuing or trying to get better at, I kind of did a double check. Do I have reverence for this? Am I approaching it with the right discipline so that I could actually have more fun doing it instead of doing things in a haphazard way and not enjoying as much and so on?
Yeah, I think so. And in hearing him just talk about, all right, maybe although we don't like discipline in the moment, that is the key to a better life. Obviously, it's something I talk about as a therapist. We don't want just immediate gratification all the time. If you want to reach your bigger goals, you have to say no to stuff. But we also don't want to live on the other side of that, because I think sometimes in many ways I could be too self-disciplined that I would opt to work instead of go do something fun. So it's about finding that balance.
Like you and I are both writers, and imagine if, and I've seen people do this. I've seen people like for their whole lives want to be writers and never write a book, but because they would write one day and then the next day they'd go to a party, or the next day they'd go out to dinner, or the next day they would just watch TV and be too lazy to write, or they'd get writer's block or whatever. And so ultimately they're having fun, maybe going to all these parties or watching TV or whatever, but they're not going to write a book, which ultimately would give them a lot of personal satisfaction, regardless of how the book sold. It'd give them a lot of personal satisfaction that they achieved something.
Right. And there's days that writing is not fun, right? There are days where it's
Writing is never, if you think about it, writing is never fun. I mean, sometimes it's fun mentally, like, oh, I feel good about this way I approach something and I accomplished something. But just the act of sitting down and typing keys is not we didn't evolve to do that. Like humans aren't supposed to do that. And so it's not really a fun physical activity.
right. And these days, because I'm writing a book and it's kind of in my spare time, like a lot of my weekends go towards writing a book. It is not the most fun thing to do on a Saturday night, is to sit behind my laptop and chapter 7. A lot of things I'd rather be doing, but because I want a book to come out again, I choose to do it for a little while.
No, so yeah, I agree. That book, and also I feel like I always love Robert Greene as an author. So, he's the author of 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, The Laws of Human Nature, and Ryan had been his mentee. And Robert Greene has this really amazing way of, he has so much knowledge and does so much research. So he tells constant stories from all over history to make his points. And Ryan has a really good way of kind of emulating that style, maybe less intense, because Robert Greene has so many stories in each chapter. But Ryan has done a good job of really kind of mastering that style of weaving in, historical stories with the points he's trying to make. And so his books are enjoyable.
Definitely.
What about another book or anything? What's another thing that you enjoy? We'll take turns.
Let's see. I guess another book I would say, you had her on your podcast as well, but Edith Eger's book, The Gift.
Oh yeah, I was just looking at that book. It's on my bookshelf behind me.
I really enjoyed that book. I mean, obviously not a uplifting topic, but what a remarkable woman who was a survivor of Auschwitz, but is now a psychologist and explains, how do you turn a terrible situation into something good? And she makes it clear, like, don't compare your situation to mine and be like, well, mine wasn't as bad. She doesn't want her readers to do that, but instead just says, here's how you keep a positive attitude no matter what you're going through in life, but does it in a way that wasn't just, I don't know, cliche, but she does it in a really helpful way.
Do you remember specifically how? I kind of forget what she was on the podcast, and I remember being super inspired afterwards. And after reading the book.
Like one of her like slogans was like, you can't heal what you don't feel, but she talks about that it's okay to have all of those feelings and to allow yourself to experience them. And I also loved when she told the story of how just somewhat recently, because she and her sister were both in Auschwitz, and they were talking about whether or not to go back and visit it now. And she decided, I'm going to go back and that will be healing to me. And her sister was like, no way. Why would you ever want to go there? And her sister chose not to, but they respected each other's decisions in terms of knowing, okay, there's more than one way to heal. There's not one right answer. Because you might go, even if you go see a therapist, they might be like, no, you have to face this thing from your past. Well, not everybody has to do that. And not everybody has the opportunity to, and might not be healing for everybody. So it was just, for me, it was just a really great story of how we heal from stuff, but how everybody heals a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's it. And what do you think you learned as a therapist? Because you're a psychologist.
Yeah, I think I learned just how resilient we can be, but how often we just really, I think she was a great example of how we don't really want to heal. We just want to go on with our lives. And sometimes other people cheer us on because we look like we're okay from the outside. And somebody that's been through something horrific, like they still have a job and they still have a relationship and they smile sometimes. So we're like, oh, you're so strong. And we don't really know what they're dealing with on the inside. And like she said, for years, she pretended like she was okay, but then she was kind of bitter and angry and irritable. And it wasn't until decades later that she went back to get her degree in psychology. And that just reminded her of, I actually haven't healed. I just wished I had. And I was kind of acting as though I had.
I wonder if she did think that, or if by that point she had already moved past the anger and bitterness because she was doing something. So she was doing something she loved, which was getting a degree in psychology. And that is what healed, as opposed to kind of this awareness that she hadn't, like you said, she realized she hadn't really gotten over the bitterness and the anger. That kind of came after the healing, and the healing itself was taking action and doing something she loved.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point, because when we do take action, we know to change your behavior first and the feelings follow. So when you say, I'm going to go out there and do something, and you start doing it, then often you start to feel better. And I guess probably just knowing, I can still do this and I can help other people and I'm not damaged goods. Because when we treat ourselves like, I went through something awful and I'm too damaged to be productive or to have meaning in life, we start to act that way. And then when you act that way, you don't actually function and help people, and the worse you feel.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think you can't think your way out of a problem. I think you have to act your way out of a problem.
Yeah, and I'm always reminded I had a sprained ankle once and surfing injury. And sprained my ankle bad enough that the doctor said, I think it's broken, but it's so swollen we can't tell if it's broken or not. So go home and rest, come back in a week and we'll do another round of x-rays. And by then we'll be able to tell if it's actually broken. So I went home thinking I had a broken ankle. So I didn't move for the entire week. I was just waiting to go get more x-rays because I didn't want to mess anything up. And a week later, she's like, it's still too swollen to tell. We don't know what we're going to do. But by then it had swelled so much that it was really painful and I couldn't move. When I would get up off the couch, even with crutches, it just hurt too much. So they sent me to a physical therapist who looked at it for 3 seconds and was like, your leg's not broken, Amy. It's just sprained. And you're making it worse by not walking or moving it. And within a day, I could walk on it and I was fine. It still hurt a little bit, but it wasn't anything like it was. But it was one of those reminders of I treated myself like I had a broken leg. And the longer I did that, the worse I felt and the worse I made it. And we do that with our emotions too when when we think, God, I went through something awful and now I'm damaged or I'm not strong enough to handle this or that. So then we treat ourselves like we're fragile. We actually become fragile and make it worse.
Yeah, like I had a similar experience when I had COVID a few months ago, and at first I didn't get myself tested. At first, I assumed I had COVID, so I'm like, got a fever, I'm shivering, I'm in pain, I'm under the covers, and then I took a COVID test, and it was negative. I didn't have COVID, and so I was like, oh, I don't have COVID. So then I just walked around the house. I announced to everyone I don't have COVID. I was watching TV. I was, hanging out. I it's like, yeah, I'm not even sick. Why did I even think I had COVID? And then I took a test an hour later and I was positive for COVID. Like I had done the test wrong the first time. And so then I realized I had COVID, but I refused to have the symptoms again. So I just did not let myself have the symptoms again. And I don't think it's always that easy with COVID, but
Right.
it does show the strength of the mind in these things.
It really is quite powerful. And what we think about tends to, I don't know, kind of come true. And they say that with lots of physical things, that when we assume the worst, then we feel the worst. And then the worse we feel, the less we do. And the less we do, the worse we feel again. It's this vicious cycle.
I think people underestimate the importance of mindset. Like, and this is really true for like sports or competitive activities as well. Like, I
Right.
don't know what statistics are done on this. I just think mindset plays a really important role for any kind of performance related thing, like whether it's public speaking or sports or games or whatever.
Yeah, there's studies on that. And I don't know the exact statistic either. But like if a professional football player steps out on the field and thinks, gee, I hope I don't lose today, they're going to perform much differently than if they step out there and say, we're going to win today. And we know that like about an elite athlete, yeah, they're there to win or they're there to do their best. But when it comes to us, we often don't do that. Like when you step on a stage for a public speech, you think, oh, hope I don't embarrass myself. And you like just want to avoid being the worst. Or people in sales are like, I don't want to have the worst sales in my division this month. Like, no, if you if you aim much higher, you'll perform much better. But yet sometimes we just do that. We just want to have the worst or to embarrass ourselves or just don't want to fail completely. And we let ourselves off the hook, but it does make a huge difference.
Or we tell this narrative that, oh, I'm a loser and here I am losing again. And, somehow we get something from that narrative. Although, I don't know why we would get something from that, but somehow we do. It's like it's an easy excuse. I'm losing this because I'm a loser. And so it kind of helps us define what's happening, as opposed to saying I'm playing. Let's say like with a game of chess, instead of saying I'm playing poorly right now and I need to do something right now, it kind of is almost easier to say, well, I'm just a loser in general, so that's why I'm losing.
Right.
So I don't have to put in any more effort in this game because
Exactly.
I'm already a loser.
Yep. Yeah. Those labels we
So,
put on ourselves like loser can make a huge difference.
like I had a game. This is just a few weeks ago in a tournament. I had a game where something unexpected happened in the beginning, and I thought I was losing, and I did start to get despondent. And when I later looked at the game on the computer, it turned out I wasn't losing at all. It was the computer thought it was dead even, but I thought I was losing. So I started making moves that actually were bad moves, and then I was losing. And once I was losing, I figured, well, I'm losing, so now I should just try to, fight my best and have some counterplay. So I had a little bit of counterplay, and I got a little bit more optimistic. And even though at that point the computer thought I was losing, because the trend was going in my favor, I started to feel like I was winning, and then I did win.
Interesting.
It was totally like a mindset game. The entire game was defined by the mindset.
Isn't that cool though? How, and you can see it when you watch like a sporting event, how, morale shifts or something happens or they go on a streak where they're making lots of baskets. It just continues because it's like contagious. We know emotions are contagious. So when somebody's excited and they're on your team, then you get excited and you perform better. But yeah, our emotions play a huge role, the way we think, whether we think we're winning or we're losing. Great example.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team
or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. So, okay, what's another thing that you recommend? Book, TV, activity? restaurant.
I'm going to name mostly books because if you'll recall, I've seen like 12 movies in my life. So I don't have any movie recommendations I can offer.
Wait, you don't binge watch Netflix or anything?
Yeah, no. And not
Oh
because I'm
my
like
gosh.
I'm not against it or anything, but I was on your podcast once, we were talking about this because we would always talk about like movie references or something. I don't know any of them. Like just pop
Yeah.
culture and movies and TV shows are not my area of expertise.
I love good television.
I know, and you guys are always telling me about like, I don't know, like one of the first times I met you, you were like, "Oh, Curb Your Enthusiasm," and I was like, "Hmm."
Have you since watched it?
I've seen parts of it, and I'm like, I get why it's funny now. Yes.
All right. As long as you've seen parts of it.
Right. And so you'll have to give me the TV and movie
All right.
recommendations. If I were to pick another book, I might say There Is No Good Card for This, and it's written by a psychologist named Kelsey Crow. And I'm a therapist, and obviously I went through all of these things in my life. I lost my mom, lost my husband, lost my father-in-law. And yet when somebody tells me like that they've lost a loved one, I'm like, I really don't know what to say. So I just say like, I'm really sorry. I'm a therapist and I know about this stuff. So you'd think I'd have something more intelligent to say, but that's all I got for you because I don't have the right words. So I found this book and I was like, I'm excited to read it because I want to know, what do you say to somebody? And there's always those awkward situations too. It's not just about when somebody loses someone, but maybe somebody tells you their spouse was just diagnosed with cancer or somebody loses their job. And just saying like, gee, I'm sorry to hear that doesn't always sound like quite the right words. Or when somebody says, hey, I was diagnosed with cancer, I mean, you're supposed to say something hopeful, or maybe they think they're doing well. And if you say, I'm sorry, it makes it sound like it isn't. So this book gives you lots of ideas. And one of the things I found probably most helpful is to just say to somebody, how are you doing now? And there's something about just adding the word now on the end of it that you can make it clear, like, I know what you're going through, or I understand you're going through something, but like, instead of just how are you, because people will say good or fine or something like that. But when you say, how are you doing now? It kind of opens the door. So if somebody wants to talk about it, they can, but they might also just say, good, how are you? And that's your sign of, all right, maybe they don't want to talk about it. And she talks a lot about empathy and gives you scripts of just simple stuff to say to people or nice things to do for them.
What if you're seeing a patient and they say, oh, my wife was just diagnosed with whatever, or my husband or whoever, or my kid, and they want a solution. And don't you feel a little bit like you're disappointing them if you say, oh, I don't know what to say?
Well, yes. And I guess when I say I don't know what to say, to be clear, that'll be somebody in my personal life. If somebody in my therapy office, I'm like, oh, we've got this. Let's figure this out. And I feel much more comfortable. So depending on who it is, if I know them a little bit, I'll know whether they want to like fix the problem or fix how they feel about the problem. Some people are going to be like in that position where if they know somebody was diagnosed with an illness, their job is going to be the one to be like, I'm going to research this. I'm going to find you the world's best doctor. I'm going to do all of this stuff. And I know that that's the role they're going to take. Other people are just going to be like, well, this is the hand we were dealt. And if that's, or they might not feel like they're in a position to do anything. So they're just going to want to deal with their feelings. So then we know, okay, how do you tackle this? What are you going to do to take care of yourself? How do you deal with the anxiety or the sadness or maybe the anticipatory grief? And we tackle it from that angle. And then I have other people who are just kind of stuck. Like, I'm not sure what angle to tackle this from. And we might talk about the pros and cons of how to tackle it.
All right. So I'm gonna read that book. I think I need that book right now. I have some book recommendations soon. We'll get to other recommendations other than books, but there's 3 books. Two of them I'm currently reading right now, but one of them I've read. First one is it's called Government Cheese by Stephen Pressfield. And so Stephen Pressfield wrote The War of Art. He wrote the novel The Legend of Bagger Vance, which became a great movie as well. He's written lots of books about writing and resistance, like the fact that artists often feel resistance when they do art. They have to overcome that. And so Government Cheese is his memoir, and his whole, like, where did he get all these insights into writing and all these amazing stories he's had writing, from writing novels that didn't work out to screenplays to even porn movies. And it's a great memoir. And so I don't know if you know Stephen. He's been on the podcast a bunch of times, but he's a really good writer.
Yeah, I know of him and I know a little bit about his work, but it sounds like an interesting book.
And then two other ones. James Patterson just came out with a memoir of his writing career. And, James Patterson's written all these thrillers. I've read some of them, and they're very good. They're very page-turning thrillers. And he wrote a memoir of his writing career. And I didn't know this. He was like the CEO of J. Walter Thompson. He was an ad guy. And on the side, he was writing novels until just the novels became bigger than anything he was doing for his career. And he was the CEO of a major ad agency. And that's how he became, a novelist.
I had no idea. And he writes, I don't know how he writes so many books and he writes them so fast and he keeps, his characters straight and does such an
Yeah.
amazing job of keeping them interesting.
Yeah. And then there's a third memoir of a novelist that just came out. Haruki Murakami is writing about how he became a novelist. And he's probably like on the short list for the Nobel Prize in fiction. And great novelist, very literary, kind of borders on literary / science fiction sometimes. But he writes about his kind of start, and he like had a jazz cafe, but in his spare time, he would write like in the mornings before the cafe opened up. And it's just very interesting to see all these different perspectives on how different people became different types of writers.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting too. When people had a former life where they sort of just write a little bit here and there versus people who I think set out to become a writer and then they're like, yeah, but I don't have anything to write about because I didn't have a life before writing or a life outside of writing.
Yeah. So I always enjoy like memoirs of writers, like even A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway, which was his sort of memoir of writing he wrote in 1957. I always really enjoy memoirs of writers. That's it for me and books. I mean, I could recommend other books, but I kind of just limited it to those. Oh, no, I had one more book recommendation, which is a novel, which this is an old book, but I just read it this past few months. And it's a genre novel, The Long Walk by Stephen King. You ever read any? It's the only novel I've ever read by Stephen King.
No, and strangely, like he was practically my neighbor when I lived in Maine, and I don't know that I've read any of his books.
Some of his books are like so thick, they're like cubes. They're like 700 pages. It's just like one big cube of paper. So this one is like a relatively small 300 pages. And the premise is you don't really understand why this is happening in the beginning, but the premise is a bunch of kids are selected to walk. And any kid who slows down or stops walking is killed. And it's a contest to see who walks the longest. And the whole novel is this one contest, and it's this 1 year, these kids walking. And it's kind of all the interactions of these kids, plus the kind of macro drama of why is this even happening?
Interesting. Well, now I'm
Yeah.
intrigued.
It's really and it's really like a creative idea. He's actually got a strong literary voice. It's not like everybody always says, "Oh, he's a genre horror writer," which I think is kind of real sort of elitism about, literary versus genre. Like it's a very well thought out novel with like great ideas in it, and he's able to take a simple premise and make a page riveting 300-page fiction about it.
Not easy to do, so impressive.
Yeah. Are there any I haven't read many novels lately for some reason. Maybe because of all the great TV that's out there and YouTube videos and other things, but like do you have any novels that you like?
It's been a minute, I think, since I've read a novel too. I end up in the nonfiction world just because I'm researching podcast guests and because I'm doing research for my own future book. So it's been a while since I've read a good novel too.
That's a problem with doing a podcast, by the way. Like I do 3 episodes a week and I'm constantly just reading all guests and potential guests because I'm not
Right.
going to have a guest on if I don't like their book.
Right.
So it's just like nonstop. And it's hard to sometimes take the time to like read a novel.
Yeah, exactly. And I find it's good because it keeps me reading because I'm always researching podcast guests. But yes, and it interferes with the ability to then find a book that you want to read just absolutely for fun and knowing you'll never have that person as a guest.
And I also have a problem like listening to podcasts actually because I do a podcast 3 times a week. That's all the listening of podcasts I can handle. So I don't really like listen to a lot of podcasts.
I do, and I listen, but like while I'm at the gym or when I'm in the car, I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts.
That's the only time people listen. That's why during the pandemic, in general, podcast numbers went down.
Right, because
'Cause-
other people would say that to me, like, "Oh, it must be going up now that everybody's from home." And like, no, nobody's really listening to the podcast while they're working from home. They just tend to do it while they're doing something else, like exercising or commuting.
Yeah. Yeah, or taking a walk or whatever, but they have to leave the house to listen to a podcast,
Right,
basically.
right.
Uh, I have some TV show recommendations, but you probably don't have any.
I want to hear yours for sure.
So one is I think you would like this one. It's called Yellowstone.
Okay, I've
And
heard of it.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's basically about this ranch in Montana, and by ranch, it's like a big ranch, like they, I guess deal with cows and horses and all that kind of stuff and grow things. And Kevin Costner's the main guy. He's kind of like the patriarch of this family that owns this ranch. And there's all this drama because the Native Americans that near there, are there's a tension because the ranch was once their land, and the government, there's a tension because they want to develop the land instead of just having it, hundreds of thousands of acres just exist rather than develop airports and things like that. And so there's all these different tensions, and also the ranch loses money. So and the family itself has all the typical problems of a TV dramatic family. So it's very well written. The writer, there's now a prequel called 1883, like how did they get to this land? And then there's another prequel coming out which is going to star Harrison Ford, called 1929, which takes place in between 1883 and Yellowstone. So it's very popular.
I know, I guess that's why I've heard about it. I've heard about it a lot of places, but never seen an episode. But all right, if you recommend it, I promise I'll put it on my list.
My wife was at a party and someone told her, "Oh, there's a weird statistic where people who are Republican tend to like Yellowstone, and people who are Democrat tend to like Game of Thrones." And she was kind of insulted by this because she's neither party, but Yellowstone is all about actually this guy who wants to protect the environment and not let land developers all over the place and build airports and all this kind of stuff. And Game of Thrones has an incredible amount of violence and, very, not pleasant situations. And so it's funny that one's associated with blue states apparently, and the other is associated with red states.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So then so this one's a comedy that I recommend. It's 5 seasons, and the last season just happened, and it's a TV show. It's called Atlanta, and obviously mostly it takes place in Atlanta. Some seasons don't take place in Atlanta, but it's by Donald Glover, who's a musician also, and he's also been a comedian. He's been a writer for Jon Stewart. He's an incredible artist, and he created the show Atlanta, which he stars in, and he writes and he directs, and it's an amazingly creative and funny show.
Sounds good too.
Yeah, TV is interesting because it allows you to, just, I guess, as opposed to movies, which have these like $200 million budgets, TV allows you to test relatively cheaply by media standards, creative ideas. And I think the best TV shows now are so much more creative than they ever were before.
I
And
think
there's so many
so.
choices.
Right. And I think now that we have all these choices, and so Nick and I will talk about that, where we talk about putting somebody on our podcast, and the options are like, even somebody that's a megastar, some people are like, I've never heard of them because we don't have like network TV. Whereas back in the day, we all watched the same TV shows. But now that you can watch a show on Netflix or Hulu or whatever you choose to stream it on, there's so many different options that sometimes it's hard to pick which one. I think sometimes that's my problem, why I don't watch a lot of shows. I'm overwhelmed by what to pick. So glad you're offering suggestions.
Yeah, no, it's the same with me. I mean, there's like thousands of shows out there. How do you know? There's a couple of sources. One is I always look for good sitcoms that star comedians that I like, because then I have a feeling, and if I've heard something good about it, I have a feeling it's good. Then I'm gonna use a curse word, but for movies, if you search for the mindfuck movie list, there's various mindfuck movie lists where the list is filled with movies that are just really they're good movies, but they also are like twisted in some way.
Oh,
And
okay.
I find those to be like, so there's a movie I would recommend, Coherence, which I can't possibly describe. You would just have to see it to but it's totally a mindfuck movie, and it's really beautifully done. So
Obviously, as a therapist, I'm super intrigued by anything that has to do with society and the mind and things that surprise us. So I'll have to check out
yeah,
that list too.
this would be really interesting from a therapist's point of view too. But again, it's not like a normal movie. It's a really interesting story. But yeah, those were my main recommendations on TV and movies. What about you? What else? What new activities have you been doing?
Let's see. For new ones, I guess I live on a sailboat. I jet ski a lot. Love to do anything that has to do with being on the water. But something new that I added to the list was I got a GoPro camera so I can do stuff underwater, which is like another universe. So in addition to just keeping up with my newest hobby is kind of like underwater pictures. I don't dive or anything. I can snorkel, but I can go underwater, and there's something about being able to see a manatee or a dolphin or underwater sea creature, potentially a shark, from a different angle. That's kind of cool.
How deep do you go underwater though if you don't dive or
I
snorkel?
don't go super deep because also my ears start to bother me if I go way down. So I'm not one of those, like I know some people do this free diving where they go way down and just hold their breath. So I'm not into that either. So I don't go down very deep. But luckily in the Florida Keys, the water's not deep in a lot of places. We have coral reefs that are just a few feet down, and the water's crystal clear, so you can see forever.
And if you take a photograph of a shark, aren't you worried the shark's going to bite you?
We do have the occasional shark bite down here, but luckily, and I've seen sharks, but like for the most part, they're usually small. They're usually not aggressive. Every once in a while they are, but again, if you look at the statistics, your chances of being bitten by a shark are pretty low compared to all the other dangers you face in life.
I'm going to make one suggestion. You do the GoPro camera underwater. You should also get a drone and play around with GoPro or whatever cameras in the drone, like aerial photography using a drone.
I agree. I think that would be super cool to do. And I have just a small cheap drone that I was playing with. It's not one you'd want to put, up in the air on a windy day. But yeah, I think that would be fun.
There's a whole genre on YouTube of like crazy drones doing all this aerial tricks and videotaping it, and from the drone's point of view, and it's really fascinating.
When I see those videos, I'm always like, that's amazing how they do it. And I know, obviously, it's just a matter of getting, like, I'm capable of learning how to do it. So it's just a matter of figuring out what equipment I need or what the best thing is, and then investing in doing it. Because I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I spend all this time on the ocean. I might as well do something with it.
Yeah, you could probably really get amazing stuff there. And that's the other thing though, like YouTube and TikTok, even they've created these genres of art that never existed before. Like for instance, drone photography or drone videos. There's like hundreds of these uploaded or thousands uploaded, and you can really see, oh, this one's really beautiful, this one's not so much, and it can absorb an afternoon just watching these things and appreciating the artistry of it.
Right? Things that, yeah, I would have never dreamed possible, a decade ago. And now I'm like, not only can I see this stuff, but I could also make that footage, which is super cool.
Do you use TikTok at all?
No, I've seen TikTok. I have a TikTok account, but I've never posted anything.
Yeah, I don't really post, but I watch TikTok videos. There are some amazingly talented people on TikTok. Like, just in any category, like, parkour is this, climbing walls and jumping from building to building. And I watch these TikTok videos. It's like these kids are superheroes on TikTok. I don't know how they do these things. And I've started to really appreciate like good quality TikTok videos because you see people who are so talented at something. Or here's like one genre of TikTok video or YouTube video, so and so looks homeless and sits down at a piano in a restaurant, and this is what happens next. And they play some like amazing song, like, or amazing combination of genres. Like they'll play Dr. Dre, but done in this really classical Mozart style. And it's fascinating to see these subgenres created on YouTube and TikTok.
Right? And it gives us an opportunity to turn, something into a talent that wouldn't have been a talent years ago. And
Yeah.
obviously there's pros and cons to social media, but it's definitely one of the potential pros of it.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. One thing I've been thinking of lately is just that, everybody says, oh, TikTok or Twitter, everyone argues about politics, so it's no fun. And I agree, like arguing about politics is no fun. But then people who are really into politics say, no, these are issues we have to deal with. And so we have to discuss them and we have to argue with them and convince people to be right instead of wrong. But I really have been kind of, anytime someone brings up a political issue with me now, I sort of think to myself, is it better for me to talk about this issue, or is it better for the world if I'm just with somebody I like and not think about politics at all? And I think if everybody thought like that, like I just want to be around people I enjoy being with, as opposed to arguing about politics, just think in general that would be a better way to live and for the world itself.
I think so too. And, what are our goals in life? To get along with people? Because, we just had Thanksgiving and I heard from so many people that were like, my uncle's going to bring up something political and then the family's going to get into a fight. And you think, well, is that really how you spend your holiday? Or can you just, even if you don't agree with somebody's opinion, you don't necessarily have to argue with them. Like, oh, interesting idea. Let's move on. But to just
Yeah.
make it more about the relationship rather than trying to be right or to prove somebody else wrong. And these political conversations certainly get so heated.
Oh, and there was one thing that you said earlier. You were talking about how when you're picking guests for your podcast, and someone might be really famous because they're on some well-known TV show, but you've never heard of them. I've been debating a lot this issue of like, what's the importance of fame? Like sometimes I ask people who are in their 80s, are you still as driven to be famous as you once were? And often their answer is yes. And it seems to me that leads to a very unhappy life because I read a quote recently. Somebody said, basically 3 years after you die, nobody knows who you were.
Wow.
Like no matter how famous you were, like, if I asked somebody who was the president in 1927, chances are like they'd have to think about it if they even know the answer at all.
Right.
And like that's someone who was president of the United States of America during the Roaring '20s, a famous decade for America. Chances are most people don't know who was president then. And and that's the president. Everybody else, forget about like if such and such writer from 1927 or even from 1987. If I list you the best-selling writers of 1987, probably haven't heard of any of them. And so just the nature of fame, like we pursue it so much, and yet it's completely meaningless, particularly after you die.
That's interesting, isn't it? And even in today's world where people are famous, for being on TikTok or something like that, well, their videos might live on, but people probably aren't going to be watching them in a few years for the most part. Oh, that's
I mean, I probably watched some videos that have had billions of views, and I have no idea who the people are.
Right.
And I wouldn't recognize them in the street.
right. Interesting.
But like also, every decade, the nature of fame changes. Like think about when you wrote your first book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Like that was a best-selling book. You were everywhere. You are everywhere from it. You were writing more books in the franchise. And that's a kind of fame, right? You felt famous and probably still do. And yet, even that was a different time where self-help or self-help-ish writers had a certain degree of fame then they don't really do now.
Right. And the reason I got to write a book, so I wrote an article that went viral. I don't think an article would go viral these days. It doesn't get shared on social media as much because now people are much more likely to share a funny reel or a TikTok video. We don't really share articles from the internet that are 1,000 words long because the nature of these things has changed.
Yeah, if anything, we might share like a chart. Like instead of sharing an article, I might share a chart.
Right.
Like here are the 12 bullets of mentally strong. And charts don't, they'll go viral, but you won't bond with them emotionally as you would a book, for instance.
Right. And nobody would remember who I was. So I think the article 50 million people read, and my TED Talk has been viewed 21 million times. I've been recognized in public 3 times in my life, and that was locally. And it was from people who said, oh, you're the girl that goes running in our neighborhood, because I have these bright colored sneakers, and that's why people have recognized me. Nobody's ever said like, oh, you wrote that book, or I saw your TEDx talk, or anything like that. All I am known for locally is the girl with the orange sneakers.
Yeah, whereas let's say even the decade before that, like let's say Tim Ferriss with the 4-Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
Like he became super famous from the 4-Hour Work Week, and he did a good job converting that into an extremely successful podcast. But he tried many things. He's tried TV shows. He's tried, venture capital, and he kind of found his way to transfer his fame into a podcast. And but like if someone wrote the 4-Hour Work Week now, maybe the book would be popular for a little while, but I doubt it would lead to the same kind of celebrity status that Tim had. I mean, when he came out with his second book, The 4-Hour Body, I remember he was going to give a talk about it in New York. There was a line like 8 blocks long, like almost a mile long outside the building where he was giving the talk. And I just don't see that happening anymore.
I don't either, because I feel like we're spread out in so many different directions now. And again, the 30-second TikTok video with 1 billion views, doesn't mean anything to you. 10 minutes later, you won't remember you watched it, but it was popular. But yeah, I don't think we would do that anymore either. That's interesting to think about, though.
Yeah, and so people kind of go on these quests for fame because I guess you could monetize fame to some extent, like you get a better book advance or you get to be an advisor to a company or whatever. But it's a lot. The nature of fame is a lot different, and I think it changes every decade. So I try to tell myself this just to try to get myself to enjoy life as opposed to always trying to get more followers on social media or whatever. These things that are really useless as opposed to just enjoying the moments I have,
And
which sometimes are not related to fame at all.
I wonder why fame is so important to so many people. Like, what are we hoping we'd get out of it? Obviously, it's not leaving behind a legacy because everybody forgets who you are anyway. So, like, what is it that we think we'll gain from being more famous?
I could tell you. I think first off, uh, I think more people will like me
Mm,
if I'm famous, like me personally, so that I don't have to do as much personally for people to like me personally.
okay.
You know, whether it's like a woman, let's say when I was dating, or just friends or whatever, that they would like me automatically because I was famous. So it was a very insecure kind of feeling. Like I was insecure about my own ability to get people to like me. So I needed the fame to kind of go before me to announce, hey, here's a really likable person. So you should like him regardless of how he acts because he's famous.
Okay.
And so it's totally from a source of insecurity. And then again, and then also there is money making opportunities when you're famous.
Right.
So that's for sure. And but again, capturing fame and what the nature of fame is, and again how it changes every year, it's harder to get universal fame. Like, some people might know you because of a TV show on Netflix. Other people might not subscribe to Netflix and have never seen you. So it's a lot more uh, niche fame at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's 2 points that you made are interesting because definitely, if you write books, publishers want to know how many social media followers you have. And if you're doing
That's directly connected to your advance now.
right,
The number of social media followers you have is 100% related to, and your prior book sales is. But let's say you didn't have prior book sales, your social media number of followers is 100% correlated to your advance.
right. And it didn't used to be that way because obviously we didn't have huge, when I wrote my first book, I don't think Instagram had even been invented yet. So it wasn't as big of a deal. And then I feel like the pendulum swung so far that book deals were being handed out to people with these giant followings. And then we figured out, well, just because somebody's funny on TikTok doesn't mean we want to read their book. But
Yeah.
it hasn't gone away completely. That publishers still definitely will ask, or they when they market your books, they put how many followers you have on each social media channel as part of the marketing deal.
Yeah, it's too bad. Like I think I've benefited from it somewhat because I was active in social media at the right time. So I never got millions of followers, but I got enough followers that it was good for a good advance once or twice. But then I would feel bad if the book sales don't match the follower numbers. So,
Right.
there's always pros and cons. And and book advances are a weird thing because it's not like, let's say you get like, I'm gonna make up just a number for a book advance. It's neither big or low, but like a $500,000 advance is a pretty big advance. Very few people get a six-figure advances. But let's just say I'm making that number up completely. I've never had that advance, but $500,000 seems like a lot, but it's spread out over like 4 or 5 payments over years, and then it's heavily taxed, and your agent takes 20%. So it's not really like a lot of money per year, and it doesn't really, even of an advance like $500,000 doesn't really directly pay for the time you spend on writing your book.
Yeah, that's the funny part, right? I remember when I was writing my first book and I didn't know what an author made. I had no idea how any of this worked and was just very confused. I'm like, wait, it's an advance, yet you get to keep it. And if you only sell 12 copies, then I guess you win. But if you sell 1,000,000 copies, then you might end up making some royalty. The entire thing is just quite confusing. And all these years later, I'm still sometimes confused by the whole process and international rights and sales and how all of those things happen. It gets kind of messy and complicated.
Yeah, yeah. So, and this is where I always go back and forth between traditional publishing and what I don't like to use the phrase self-publishing anymore, but maybe like self-directed publishing, because the books that I've written and I've sold the most copies were self-published because I get to control the marketing, I control the pricing, I control the timing of when it's released, and I control everything. And so, in general, publishers they're great, but they're dealing with so many different writers, and their marketing departments might not do marketing exactly the way you would want them to, and and again, they're busy with a lot of writers. So the main benefit of traditional publishing is the advance. And there are a few other benefits too. And I've always worked well with the traditional publishers that I've worked with, but self-publishing has been so pleasurable for me. And I think you could make just as much money or more if you do it right with self-publishing.
Yeah, I could see. I've never self-published, but I could see that there'd be some advantages to it too, and the freedom and flexibility that you have.
Yeah. So so what else? What other things have you enjoyed this year?
Well, one thing I've learned, and I think I waited way too long to do it, was the joy of at least buying yourself a pass to the airport lounges, both Delta and American. So that when I travel these days, it's made traveling a lot better. I travel a lot for speaking engagements, and I don't love to travel when you get stuck in airports and that sort of a thing. And I thought, why did it take me so long to get passes to both of these places? So now if I'm stuck in an airport, I can at least sit and work or do something on my phone, or I'm not stuck standing around at a gate for 4 hours of my life because I would get impatient and angry that things weren't happening, but took all the stress out of traveling. So I have to say, for me, that was one of my biggest gifts to myself this year, and it's made travel life a million times better.
Yeah, how many speaking engagements do you do?
For a while, like at the beginning of the year, I was doing them like once a week, and that became a little too much because I was just on the road constantly. So I slowed it down over the summer, and I've done more virtual than anything, which has been fine. And then same with this fall, I've had a lot of virtual ones. I'm hearing from conferences that, like, because the price of plane tickets has gone up so much, that a lot of people don't want to buy the $500 conference ticket plus pay for a hotel plus travel. So they're doing a lot of things virtually, which that's fine by me too, because then I don't have to get on a plane and I don't have to travel anywhere.
And what do you speak at? Like conferences about what?
So like sometimes it's a women's conference, or sometimes it's a sales conference, sometimes it's private companies. But I, for the most part, speak about mental strength and mental health. And because of the pandemic, if anything good came out of it, I feel like companies are now much more willing to talk about mental health. And for a while, it was just like, oh, take care of yourselves, or we value mental health, so make sure you do yoga sometimes, or make sure you're um, taking care of, or you're using the 3 EAP benefits we have so you can talk to somebody, a stranger, over the phone about your stress. But I feel like companies are now starting to realize, like, yeah, that stuff's not enough. And now that people can switch workplaces, they're looking for certain things like flexibility and autonomy, and being able to take care of their mental health is more important. So I get to talk a lot about various mental health topics. And of course, some employers really want me to do it because they know that depression affects productivity, or anxiety disorders are going to decrease the amount of time people are able to work. So from that standpoint, it makes sense to take care of people's mental health, but also from a human standpoint, like so many people are suffering right now. It just makes sense to have these conversations and invite people to get help if they need it, and talk about the stuff they can be doing on an everyday basis to take care of themselves too.
Do you have an agent for your speaking?
I have a speakers bureau that I work with.
Are they pretty good?
They're really good. The Montauk Group, they're excellent at managing all of my speaking stuff for me, which makes my life much easier.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
Yeah, I every now and then I think I would like to do more public speaking, but I also just like sitting at home too. I don't know.
I thought of you the other day because I was watching the World Cup, and it was in Qatar. And I
And
remember,
I'm such a great soccer player.
yeah, that too. But I also remembered that you had written this article once that you were offered, I think, 60 grand to go to Qatar, and you said no. Who would go there for $60,000?
Yeah, I didn't want to go.
So
I remember that. Like I didn't even return their calls. They were like calling all the time. So finally just dropped them.
so
I
when
guess now I would probably do it, but
but when I saw the World Cup was there, I was like, who would want to go there? James wouldn't even go there for 60 grand.
yeah, I'm surprised they let the World Cup be there, but I guess they gave a lot of money.
Right? Interesting. Yeah.
Any new podcasts you like?
So when it comes to podcasts, I often listen to true crime, which I know is like the biggest genre
Those are the
out
most
there.
popular.
Yeah.
Those are the most popular podcasts.
Right? Which is so bizarre that so many other people like it. But I have this fascination with like missing people. Like I always want to know, where did they go? So one of the podcasts I listen to is called The Vanished. And it's just about that, about people who've disappeared and we have no idea where they are. And I always just want to know, like, and I hope that they just, bump their head and they have amnesia and we'll find them someday. And some people have been found over the years. Sometimes they disappeared on purpose, either because it was like a unhealthy situation they were in, or they just wanted to start a new life somewhere else. And other people disappeared because they were wanted and by the police or something. So they disappeared on purpose. And then other people we just never found.
Yeah, I think most, unfortunately, like I'm always fast. Like if you have a lot of Facebook friends or a lot of people you follow on Facebook, you're constantly seeing, oh, so and so is missing. Have you seen them? Please tell us. We're very concerned. It's our daughter, nephew, niece, friend's daughter, or whatever. And I always see those, and then I get fascinated. I Google a few days later and see what happened. And unfortunately, it's usually almost always bad news.
Right.
And it's really, and now that, you would think it's a rare thing, but it's actually like, I'm seeing it all the time in my Facebook feeds. So like these things, people have to be careful out there.
Yeah, that's just it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of them are homicides. Sometimes people, their car went off an embankment and they're at the bottom of a river and it takes 30 years to find their car or something like that too. But yeah, definitely. And something about, I think, crime in general and we like to watch. We're kind of fascinated with seeing it happen to other people, or we want to know, like if somebody gets murdered, we want to know, like, well, what did they do wrong? Because I don't do that, and then I feel safe. So if that person sold drugs, for instance, or had a dangerous lifestyle, you think, well, those things only happen to those kinds of people. They don't happen to people like me. And then you run into those episodes where somebody's just at home watching TV and gets murdered by a stranger, and then it raises our anxiety because we think, oh, gosh, that could have been me.
Yeah. If you were to do a true crime podcast, what would you do?
Since I do love mental health and I do love getting in the minds of people, like I would probably, I'm kind of curious about that, like when somebody's childhood then affects them in a way that they then go on to commit crime or something like that. So that kind of interests me, but I don't really want to talk about serial killers and that sort of a thing, but maybe just about missing people and what happened to them and what their family must go through, because I always think about that too. It's one thing when you lose somebody and you can grieve their loss, but like if your child went missing, how do you ever like just go on and live a normal life again? Like you're going to go out to
I don't think I
parties
could.
and go to movies and have fun, and you can't keep looking for them forever. But on the other hand, how do you, and then every time you're walking down the street, are you still looking for them? I can't imagine what that would be like.
Jay, whenever we do kind of a semi-true crime thing, like let's say we talk about a financial scandal, do those podcasts do those episodes do better than other episodes?
Oh yeah, people love a good true crime, like the FTX one, and then the hacker
Like
one.
when we did the Enron FTX one,
Yeah.
did that one do percentage-wise, like how much better? Did it do 10% better, 20% better?
I wouldn't say like 10%, maybe like 5% better. Like it would just get a lot more feedback too.
Oh yeah, we get a lot more feedback. Yeah, people want to weigh in.
That's how you know the listener is engaging.
Maybe we should try to do more. Like, what are some good financial crimes we could do? Could probably come up with a few. We could commit some financial crimes and then talk about it.
I had federal jury duty earlier in the year, and I was like, oh, federal jury duty, what do you get for that? And I didn't get picked because they never pick social workers anyway. But it was a case about something about money laundering and things like that. It was kind of interesting to see these things that still go on, and things that I would have no idea of how people are laundering money and what they're doing and what their business really is, even though they have this front for a business. I don't know. Stuff's kind of fascinating to me too.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done a couple episodes like that, and they've been really riveting in terms of the storytelling side. Uh, I have one more recommendation here, which is I recently saw this. I haven't been watching a lot of comedy specials lately. I kind of retired from doing comedy, and then I didn't even want to watch comedy for a while. So, but I watched this one stand-up special a few weeks ago or recently called Jew by Ari Shafir. And you don't have to be Jewish or not. Like my whole family, most of them was not Jewish. They were all laughing hysterically. It's on YouTube, Jew by Ari Shafir, and it's so funny. Like he was being educated to be a rabbi, and he quit, an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and he quit all of that and became a comedian. And he just makes fun of the whole thing, and it's just hilarious. It is so funny.
And who doesn't
Like-
need a laugh right now? So I think that's a good thing to
About
check out.
Jews in particular.
Sure.
So, because Kanye lately has been in the news so much
Right.
on the opposite side of that. But like he'll take every story, like he'll take the story of Adam and Eve, for instance. Like, why did Adam need Eve? He discovers he needs Eve, and then that becomes a whole joke. And then God says, "Okay, we'll make a woman for you to have sex with, and but I'm gonna have to take one of your ribs." And I'm not doing it justice, but Adam says, "When did how about just from scratch not become an option anymore?"
Right.
Like you created everything else from scratch. Why do we now need a rib? Like, did you lose your powers or something? Like, what's going on? And it just everything was funny. And then he goes on like Jews have this word to describe non-Jews called goys, and he basically says the word goy is a derogatory word. It's an insult if you're called a goy. And he says what's fascinating about it though is it's the most inclusive derogatory word possible. I mean, it basically means it has nothing to do with like race or color or anything else. It's just non-Jew. So like it's 0.1% of the planet has a derogatory word for everybody else on the planet. And so he just makes everything about Judaism funny.
Interesting. All right. I'll put that on my list of things to check out then.
Yes, it's on YouTube.
Okay.
And easy to remember called Jew.
All right.
And I guess those are like my main recommendations. I have to expose myself to more things other than like podcast related material.
Yeah, no, as I talked to you, I was like, wow, I've spent a lot of time in the year writing and doing podcasts and doing work-related things, but yeah, I should, and I do a lot, the things that I already enjoyed, I keep doing, but exploring new things should probably be on my list for things to do next year.
Yeah, I'm specifically not exploring new things. Like I'm trying really hard to keep up with my writing, which is not as, and also I've been trying really hard to be once again, above the ranking of chess master, and it's been taking a much longer time than I would like. So I'm starting to think I actually am aging, and that's affecting me.
Ah, okay. You weren't immune to that thing either?
No, I wasn't immune to aging, and I thought I was. But
I think that's what I'm battling too. I run a timed mile every day, and for a long time I got faster and faster and faster. Now I've reached this plateau, and I think, does that mean I'm now not able to outrun my age anymore?
yeah, that's yeah. You have to find other ways to find satisfaction with life as you age, because the things that you were great in when you were in your 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever, just some things decline. And let's say you were a business success because you worked 100 hours a week at business, and you were networking all the time, and you just don't feel like doing that at a certain age. So you have to kind of move more into to find satisfaction from business, for instance. Yeah, you have to move more into like a mentorship type of role. Or the same thing might be true for writing. Like instead of writing like these, Brat Pack kind of stories, like, oh, partying in New York City and relationships and this happens and that happens. It's a different type of writing that occurs, as you get older. I don't know. Just everything changes.
As you get more mature, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully.
Right.
I don't know if maturity changes. It
Do
might
we
get worse.
gain more wisdom and shift our focus.
You're supposed to gain wisdom, but I don't know if that actually happens.
I know, right?
But so when's the next book coming out? The workbook's coming out early in the year.
Yeah, the workbook comes out February 28th, and that'll be the 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do workbook. And then if all goes according to plan, that my couples book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Couples Don't Do, will come out at the end of next year, but it's not quite written yet. And I don't know if you heard, most of HarperCollins is on strike these days. So hopefully
I didn't know that.
Hopefully the employee strike will end. My editor's on strike, so depending on when.
Who's your editor?
Maddie and like Lisa Sharkey and Maddie Polari are working on the next book, but I think most of the editorial team is on strike at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. HarperCollins was my last publisher.
Right.
I published a book of mine last year. But, well, good luck. I'm really looking forward to the 13 things mentally strong couples don't do.
Thank
That
you.
is going to be my Bible for that entire month that you published that book.
Thank you.
So-
It's fun to write.
And thanks for coming on the podcast once again. You're one of the most regular visitors on this podcast.
Well, it's good to be back. Good to see you.
And Jay, thank you also for participating in this in
thank you.
small ways.
It's a very small way. All right.
It's your last chance to check everything off your list at NFM. Get savings in every department. Shop in-stock gifts like toys, electronics, appliances, and furniture. NFM gift cards make amazing presents. Save time with drive-through pickup. Get 30-month financing on qualifying appliance, TV, and audio purchases. And 24-month financing store-wide at NFM. Store closing early Christmas Eve and closed Christmas. Visit NFM for your chance to win a Tesla Model Y. Minimum monthly payments required, 18% APR. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
The McNugget Buddies are back. But this time, they got a fresh look as part of the new Kerwin Frost box at McDonald's. We're talking all new buddies, dressed head to toe in the freshest fits, all designed by the artist Kerwin Frost. So when you order the Kerwin Frost box with your choice of 10-piece McNuggets or a Big Mac, you'll get one of the flyest McNugget Buddies to go with it. Think you can collect them all? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last.